there's a lot of young people in the country that are more like what you're saying, where, it's, the system has screwed them, for want of a better description. Property prices are outrageous in the UK. So it's trying to, get something where they can get something more than they would get in any other way. And if you think about that, i.e. the property prices, that comes down to the fact that the money system, globally, but particularly in the UK, the pound has failed them. It's out of sync. If you look at the multiple that you need for a house, it was bad enough when I started working 25 years ago, but it's really bad now. So they probably feel that they haven't got the chances that people of my generation and the generation had.
Welcome back to the Bitcoin Economy podcast. We have Andrew Webley, CEO of a smarter web company in the UK. Andrew, thanks for coming on.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So our good friend, Adrian Morris, who's been on the show several times, has introduced us and is like, you guys got to bring on Andrew. So super excited to do, this conversation today. Just to set the stage a little bit, we want to dive into your background a little on what led you to this point, really how you got orange pilled. We want to talk about, smarter web company. What I want to focus on too is just the UK market in general, its approach to Bitcoin, how, investors outside of the UK should think about companies getting involved with Bitcoin in the UK specifically. You guys have been in finance and the center of finance for a very long time. The first joint stock company was a Dutch East India company. So as we're diving into Bitcoin and stocks and the new and the old, I think you're the perfect guy to come in and talk about it. So Andrew, let's just start it out and tell us a little bit of background on how you got into Bitcoin, and then a little bit on how you started, the smarter web company.
Yeah, so I started working in 1999, which was just before the dot-com crash. So I joined a very, very small company that became a very big company, one of the biggest companies in the UK. And today it's still the largest investment broker in the UK. So I worked there for 10 years, the first 10 years of my career. And then I decided that I wanted to set up my own business. So my old bosses, Peter Hargreaves and Steve Lansdown, always used to telling us how brilliant it was them setting up their own business. And I wanted to do the same. So I set up the Smarter Web Company. We've been profitable every single year for 15 years.
Nice.
And then about 10 years ago, just under, maybe 8 years, I found Bitcoin. What was the turning point for me with Bitcoin, though, was, I bought it, sold it, this sort of a thing. I wish that I didn't. I wish I just bought it and held it, But, being completely transparent, I didn't understand it anything like I do now. But the turning point for me was about 5 years ago when I came across MicroStrategy. So, I saw this public company. So I've been investing, let's say for 20 years or whatever at that point. And I found this public company that had also taken Bitcoin and merged the two. And I just thought it was the best thing ever. And when we talk about the UK in a minute, I'll explain why particularly it was so exciting to me. And that's when, the penny really dropped with Bitcoin, because in the UK, it's quite difficult to hold Bitcoin. It's quite difficult to buy it in size. There's, quite high tax for any gains, 24% capital gains tax, no way of protecting it. So for me, when I found MicroStrategy, I just thought it was amazing. And then I put the work in. I spent hundreds and hundreds of hours learning everything that I could about Bitcoin. And, it's, we're where we are today because of that. So nowadays, there's no doubt in my mind about its qualities and why I see it as the very, very best asset in the world for the future. I have to give that credit to Michael Saylor, really, because he, I suppose he is the one that had orange filled me, even though I'd been buying it for, a number of years before.
Yeah. And that's something I think is fascinating. Is I didn't initially understand, or I didn't have a need really to buy MicroStrategy, and I was all for it because they were buying Bitcoin. But as someone who's already holding Bitcoin, I was like, oh, I'll just hold the real thing. There's a lot of concerns around custody going through, 2017 cycle. It's, hey, you need to self custody. This is, the way you protect your assets. And I still believe that, but I do believe there's other ways to participate in the ecosystem. What for you was brought it beyond the ability just to hold Bitcoin directly and using it within the vehicle of a company, the fundraising element, the acquisition element. And that took a while for it to click for me. Like, what was it that clicked for you saying, "Oh, hey, it actually makes sense to have public companies own Bitcoin?"
Well, there's a couple of things. So the first thing for me was, so in the UK, lots of people have got money in SIPs, which is a
Mhm.
retirement product, pension,
Yeah.
and something called ISAs, which is the same sort of thing in terms of a wrapper, but you can get to the money before you retire. So for me, like most people in the UK, you save money into your pension or your ISA, and then you've got that pot of money that you can buy stocks and shares with. So I suppose it was just whether you would call it accessibility, indirect tax planning, or something like that. That was the main thing. It wasn't with and this is different to how I feel today. But
Mhm.
back then, it wasn't so much that you could get compounded Bitcoin, or leveraged
Yeah.
Bitcoin, whatever you want to call it. It was more that you could just get Bitcoin
Mhm.
with your money that you couldn't put into Bitcoin in any other way. Obviously, it's different now because with one of the key things. So I hold, Bitcoin myself directly. I self custody some of it, and I hold some of it in on exchanges, which a lot of people frown upon. But we all do things differently. For what I believe now is that Bitcoin's obviously great, but
Mhm.
the only thing that you can get that's better than Bitcoin is compounded Bitcoin, which is the thing that a well-run treasury gives you. And that's what companies like obviously Strategy, Metaplanet, the Smarter Web company, we're trying to do for people. So we're trying
Mhm.
to give them a place or an investment that also holds Bitcoin, but where the Bitcoin can work harder for you than holding it yourself. And there are other reasons as well, though. For example, in the UK, it is very difficult to buy Bitcoin in a reasonable size. And then there's a lot of people that, even if they could work out how their banks are going to allow them to buy it, that they won't hold it because they're just quite scared.
Mm.
Whereas, if they buy a stock through their broker, they're used to it. So they can buy a public company that's got Bitcoin on the balance sheet, just as easy as they'd buy any other public company.
So talking around before we get into the smarter web company, you guys' IPO is overall, would you say UK citizens, their approach to Bitcoin, what has been, you were orange pilled. And what was, your primary driver, but what do you start to see as others for recognizing either it's just their financial disposition, they're not seeing the future, they're seeing inflation. Historically, like Britain has a very much a culture of like, hey, we have this, very rich traditions and history, but everyone needs to know their place. Everyone needs to kind of like wear the appropriate clothing and walk in line, based on your class. And, it's something that my wife loves. She grew up, spent a couple of years there, like living there near like Bracknell or Ascot near Windsor, depending on who you ask. But for you, what do you think are people seeing, oh, hey, I'm never going to be in that class above. I'm never going to be able to save and really improve my life. So a lot of the same things Gen Z in the United States faces. Hey, I'm not going to own a house. I'm never going to have all these vacations that I want. What are those drivers that you're seeing locally?
Yeah. So, I probably think slightly about differently about Bitcoin to some people, but I think one of the main reasons why a lot of people like Bitcoin nowadays in the UK is because it's an accepted, established, trusted asset class. And then if we look back at the last, especially the last 10 years, the performance is just out of this world. So I think there's a lot of people that, to be blunt about it, they probably don't care what it is, but they want it because they want that performance. So that's, without trying to put people into age brackets here, that's probably what you've got. There are people that are, say, my age and above.
Yeah.
It's about performance, and it is, over a period of time, it is the best performing asset by far. And I believe it will be the best performing asset by far forever. Then you've got the younger people, and, there's a lot of young people in the country that are more like what you're saying, where, it's, the system has screwed them, for want of a better description.
Hmm.
Property prices are outrageous in the UK. So it's trying to, get something where they can get something more than they would get in any other way. And if you think about that, i.e. the property prices, that need, that comes down to the fact that the money system, globally, but particularly in the UK, the pound has failed them. It's out of
Hmm.
sync. If you look at the multiple that you need for a house, it was bad enough when I started working 25 years ago, but it's really bad now. So they probably feel that they haven't got the chances that people of my generation and the
Hmm.
generation had. And they're right about that. And then you've got the classic thing, without sounding like an old man, where, people are less patient nowadays. Obviously with my internet background, this is fascinating because the society has become less patient because of the immediacy of
Hmm.
everything. So you've got to factor that into that as well. And then on top of that, you've got people like me as well, where some of those things are true with me. But the very best thing about Bitcoin to me is that it's fair. Going back to your class comment, I love the fact that, you could have been born into a load of money or you could be born in nothing. And if you put the work in to understand Bitcoin, then you can get rewarded from that. The more work you put into understanding it, the more potentially you would be rewarded. And to me, that's the best thing ever because, it removes class. Bitcoin doesn't care whether you're a billionaire or whether you've got, 10 quid left in your pocket. It doesn't care where you live in the world. It doesn't care who your government are. And I think that's really great because it's truly accessible and truly fair to everyone.
Yeah, the fact that anyone can go in, you don't have to be a VC, accredited investor. There's been so many chances for people to buy, and it's not going to be $500, but now it's over 100,000 US dollars at least, and but it's so accessible, for most people to get to it. But you
That
you
was
made
what
a
we, when we did our
yeah.
IPO, though, it was so important, that ethos. So what we did with our IPO is we allowed retail investors to participate from the start. Whereas what normally happens is, you get a very closed book that the man on the street doesn't have access to. Whereas right from the start and for a number of fundraisings afterwards, we said to the retail investors, you can have the same terms as everyone else. So we've,
Yeah.
albeit we've been a public company, we've tried to carry some of that Bitcoin ethos into it and say, we're not going to do it in that same way. And I think there's a lot of things, what I've said to myself is that, we're on a mission here to get
Mhm.
Bitcoin so it's accessible for everyone in the UK in a sensible way alongside our operating business. And I think if people look at what we've done and how we've done things, transparently with these fundraisings and everything like that, they can see that, we actually care about what we're doing. And I think that that's something that's quite important. But that's just in my opinion.
Yeah. That's why you gotta come talk on podcasts is you have to, people need it to hear, directly from the leaders themselves. So it's like, hey, here's why I believe in Bitcoin. I'm not just, co-opting this and a tourist in the industry, but I truly believe it's a better pristine collateral to base a company off of. So getting into your IPO, was it the biggest IPO in UK history? As I was
Well,
reading?
yeah, it's been the most successful
Yeah.
IPO in UK history. It's in the UK, you've got two exchanges. You've got the London Stock Exchange and the Aquis Stock Exchange.
Yeah.
The Aquis Stock Exchange is just a smaller growth market. This weekend we made it onto the front page of the biggest paper in the UK, their money section, the Daily
Mhm.
Mail or Mail on Sunday.
Yeah.
Um, and Bitcoin doesn't get that exposure normally. So
Mhm.
we're
Yeah.
actually the first being ever to get to £1 billion market cap on Aquis. So that's quite good.
Yeah.
If we're on the FTSE 250 at the moment, we would be bang in the middle. So we'd be one of the biggest companies on the London market. We're one of the most liquid stocks on the whole, the two markets combined. We we've created sort of a mini sector in the UK, and when
Yeah.
I counted yesterday, there's about 15 companies, all with different degrees of Bitcoin treasury policies going. So yeah, it's been pretty good so far. And we're only 2 months into it. We've got an awful lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And there's an awful lot of exciting things coming. And yeah, we're just getting started with it.
Yeah. So we'll have to get into the beginnings, before the IPO, but specifically on that point. So you said 15 other companies are following your lead. Like is it super recent? Are they just, you think, following your success? Is it people that, have you spoken with saying like, hey, we want to replicate this? We need that injection of capital. We were at Strategy World hearing Saylor speak about anyone in the US outside of the Mag 7, a lot has probably trouble getting access to capital, has very limited options market. Are
Well,
you seeing that a similar
yeah,
experience?
yeah, I think that's it. You see, so we've been pretty successful so far. I think people understand what we're doing. And, it's meant that there's been quite a lot of capital that people have wanted to put towards us. And that's great. And we're very grateful. And we're doing our very, very best to make that capital work really, really well within our strategy. Unfortunately, there seem to be a lot of smaller companies that have had a tough time. I would probably say they've had a tough time because they've tried four, five, six different things, been badly run, badly
Yeah.
managed, you know, those sorts of things. And maybe that's why they've had a tough time. And then what they've sort of done is they've come out and they said, oh, we've got a Bitcoin treasury strategy. And
Mhm.
it's hard, I try and be fair to everyone, but
Yeah.
it's hard not to judge these people by their previous actions when they've
Mhm.
done it time and again. Maybe this time's different. Maybe they will do something really, really well. I hope they do because it will give a bad name to our industry. Don't currently, I think that it's probably just an opportunistic thing.
Mhm.
I think some of them have got terrible capital structures,
Mhm.
and people aren't fully aware of all the detail, for those. But we'll see. There is one or two where I think that they're doing it quite well. Again, because we've got sort of give or take 500 Bitcoin at the moment on our
Mhm.
balance, and we've got capital to grow. The strategies that we've got will easily get us to 150, 200 million pounds in terms of our treasury, which will take us to, and let's call it 2000 Bitcoin or something like that. If obviously the markets carry on as they are. So, we've got quite a large amount of Bitcoin and a strategy for getting to that place that everyone can see. It's very, very transparent. You know, the other ones, they either haven't got any Bitcoin or they've got a much smaller amount. And so I want to see them do well. You'd have to wait and see. So, if I wasn't running the Smarter Web company, I would look up all of the others and I'd say, right, who can I trust? Who's doing the strategy well for their stage? And that's how I would carve that one up. Uh, it's hard to say because obviously we're seen to be the market leader in the UK at the moment. So
Mhm.
I don't want to talk badly about anyone, but I do have to be honest about it because that's why sort of people are asking. I've had I think three of the competition in the UK all reach out to me and say can you work as a consultant and those sorts of things. And I've said to all these people, I'm struggling for the time as it is
Yeah.
working in sort of 17 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I can't really do that. And, I don't think that's really appropriate. I don't think my shareholders want that. My mission is the Smarter Web company, nothing else. I haven't got any other jobs, any other directorships. My sole focus is the Smarter Web company for the next however many years. People want me to do this job. So I thought that was sort of a bit odd, really. But it's kind of a compliment as well.
Mhm. Yeah, and we spoke with Eric Simler back at Strategy World, and part of what his background was like, not just running Simler Scientific, it was actually running like a hedge fund, and he was investing in Netflix early on, and made just a really good returns on that. And the difference in what we're looking at, and I think one of the qualifiers, is not exactly the company that you're running before you start a Bitcoin treasury strategy. It's how you're running that company. Like, are you proficient, or do you have a long-term mindset? Have you handled large amounts of capital before? And so getting into that, as you're looking at, the smarter web company versus everyone else in the UK, how have you ran the smarter web company? Tell us a little bit about the business. Tell us a little bit about how that set you up to be able to operationally just be very efficient, grow now with a huge treasury and a ton of excitement and eyeballs.
Well, so obviously being one of the main people at Hargreaves Lansdown for 10 years, was fantastic experience. And
Mm.
to work in a small company that becomes a very, very big, successful company. We listed out on the stock market. At the time, we looked after billions and billions of pounds, and now it's tens of billions of pounds. That gives you, a very good level of experience. The internet, which was my area, I was head of online when I left, was obviously absolutely critical to it. We did everything on the internet. And so that was great. And then doing it on a smaller scale, much smaller scale in my own business was really good experience too, because I know how to run a business. I know the importance of cost control, not wasting money, being profitable, all of these things, speaking to, we've got hundreds of clients that all pay us money, every year, for their website hosting, and then new projects come in and things. So, I I've got such a wide variety of clients that you get to know all of these different people, and that gives you a lot of experience as well, as opposed to if you had, say, worked on a couple of massive projects with a very small number of people. So yeah, and I think we learn from our mistakes as well,
Mhm.
So only from an investing point of view, I've had some incredible investments. And then I've also had some incredibly bad investments. So I've been on the receiving end of things that have gone great and that have gone badly. So I think we learn probably more from our failures than our successes.
Mhm.
When they've got financial repercussions, you certainly remember those lessons. So I think I can relate to people that are trusting us with their money, and understanding the importance of doing that properly, which, is something that I'm very, very proud of. By far, my wealth is in the smarter web company. So,
Yeah.
I needed to work for myself in addition to all of our shareholders. And I think that says a lot. You see it a lot of the time, no names given with some of these smaller UK companies where you've got the same people sitting behind them.
Mm.
And, when you run a public company, there's costs, right?
Yep.
So do you really want to have two or three of them when you could have one? Because, the cost base is just, two or three times bigger.
Yeah.
So I think all these sorts of things are quite interesting. And I hope that people support us because they can see that, we're doing this because we care about the mission. We're doing it because we want to grow one of the biggest companies in the UK. And, on a very limited time period of about 2 months since we became a public company, I think people can see, that we're getting on with the job. Every week we're trying to do things and, push it forward.
Yeah. And for you, when you're educating, say, your board, your team, people that in the UK, and they see some of these metrics such as like mNAV, BTC yield, days to cover. How do you explain that to them? It does take a lot of building blocks to start putting together. Hey, here's corporate finance. Here's Bitcoin. Here's it takes a lot. Like, what's been your experience like? Because I know you're getting pushback with just like classic dry wit and skepticism on like, what is this?
Yeah. So this is quite cool. Obviously I know, say, the Meta Planet or the
Yeah.
strategy metrics. We can't say all of those things in
Mm.
part because some of them are sort of a bit close to the regulatory lines. And in part because people aren't ready for them. They won't understand them. So the way you described it, building blocks is exactly what we do. If we take the paper that I was telling you about,
Mm.
they did a piece online on Saturday as well. And it was so cool to see mNAV being written in the mainstream press in the
Yeah.
UK. So they're slowly getting there. I describe it to people and I use the word compound. So when I talk to my kids about
Mhm.
saving for the future, it's all about compound interest.
Mhm.
When I'm talking to people, I talk a lot about compound Bitcoin because it's less scary than leveraged Bitcoin. Leveraged Bitcoin to me suggests debt. We haven't got any debt as a company.
Mhm.
So, you want to explain to people how the Bitcoin can effectively grow if the treasury is managed correctly, grow in size, but also grow per share basis.
Mhm.
So we're just taking our time. We're explaining the bits that we believe are important. And then over the fullness of time, things will get more and more complicated, but they'll be complicated for the people that really want to dive down. But we'll always try and make it accessible because I think that's really, really important as well. So, lots of people they only want to view the high level parts, but other people they want to dive right down. So I think that as we grow, we need to make sure that we still cater for everyone,
Yeah.
and we give it in a clear way. We've also been really, really good at trying to be the responsible person in the market. So we're very, very transparent, but then we've also got all the risk warnings alongside everything because we want people to understand what they're buying. I think it's really important that companies are very, very clear and truthful with everyone, within the realms of what they have to do by being a public company. So sometimes some companies, maybe they're not as clear on the capital structure or the debt that they've got,
Mhm.
and these sorts of things. So what we've tried to do is, because I believe it's the right way of doing it, but then also because I think that's what the regulators want to see. And if we're going to get Bitcoin widely accepted in the UK, then, we have to get the regulators on side just like everyone else. So, that's why we've taken that approach.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's going beyond Bitcoin, there's so much on the side of these SPACs and, acquisition vehicles and, just taking a company public, but that people don't fully understand. And it does take a lot of education. And I know we've talked around like 21, the company, and it's like Cantor Equity Partners, but Tether owns 46% or 48%. And the currently traded stock is like 2%. So people need to know that when they're valuing that stock, that no matter if they're running the exact same strategy with Michael Saylor, what you're buying right now in the stock market is a fraction of the actual company value and the fraction of the Bitcoin. So like there's a lot of that education, and we really applaud people that they're willing to be transparent on that. You've had a busy 2 months. What does the next 2 months look like? It's a fast market, so I won't make you think beyond that.
Well, we're really excited at the moment because last week we announced that we've got a facility that allows us to replicate
Yeah.
effectively an ATM in the States.
Yeah.
So now, we've got an additional lever for our capital raising strategy. So that's quite exciting because it's quite innovative in the UK. So what that will allow us to do is to generate, hopefully fairly vast amounts of capital alongside what people have seen us do today, and that will allow us to, grow our treasury for the benefit of, the core business, and therefore its shareholders. So we're very, very focused on that mission. It's not changed since we listed 2 months ago. Obviously, it's got a bit bigger, and we want to do that responsibly and aggressively as we move forward from here. So hopefully, it'll just be more of the same.
Yeah. And what are the best ways to follow you? I'd like to hear your thoughts. Are you active on Twitter? Like, what are the best ways to kind of hear your strategy and some of the content that you're putting out?
Yeah, so the best thing to do is to follow us on Twitter.
Yeah.
So that's Smarter Web UK. Or you can follow my personal account, which is ASJ Webley. You'll find links between the two of them. So just find one of them and you'll find the other one.
Yeah.
We do put information out on LinkedIn because some of our, sort of corporate partners, they like that. That Twitter's definitely the far more active of the two. You can also visit our website as well, because obviously being a web design company,
Yeah.
we've got a reasonable website. We put a lot of effort into the investor relations website. It's always got all the latest news, the media mentions, all these sorts of things. So yeah, you could definitely follow us there as well. And you can always do it the old-fashioned way and ping us an email. We do our best to go back to every single inquiry that we get, or question, or whatever it may be. So you can just email us at support@smarterwebcompany.co.uk, and you'll probably be quite surprised that you'll get an email back, quite possibly from me, pretty quick.
Yeah, we appreciate that service. I think was it Zappos, or there's a company in, I think, Seattle, that where the CEO would have a phone and there's a customer support phone in the middle of the office. And if it started ringing, he would run, and there better be somebody that was an employee answer that phone before the CEO could get to it, because he was like, "Hey, like I'm gonna be driving you, and if I'm the one that's answering the phone, then like customer support team needs to move quicker, a little pep in their step."
But
Well, that
I
yeah,
Yeah, I started speaking to, our clients, because a lot of them, have supported us for many, many years.
yeah,
They've enjoyed the service. They've been good enough to give us their business, and they deserve the time. So I still pick up the phone during the day, not so much now, obviously, because I'm really, really busy doing a whole host of other things. But I enjoy speaking to the clients, and it makes us better as a company as well, because I can hear the things that people do and don't like. We can adapt, and it's quite funny now when the occasional person, because obviously I pick it up and they say my name, and then they ask you, and they find it sort of harder to believe that for as long as I'm running the company, I still speak to the clients and
Yeah.
everyone else. It's part of the job.
Yeah. Yeah. But hoping this also drives, Bitcoiners around the world to come check out the Smarter Web company for reasons outside of Bitcoin, just to work with you guys. But you guys already have a successful business, so keep that up. And we're excited to follow you. So Andrew, really appreciate you taking the time. You've been super busy. You're at Bitcoin Prague. You've been running around. You're in Vegas. So we appreciate you taking the time today, and we'd love to bring you on in a couple months and let's get an update.
Instant great. I look forward to it.
Yeah.